Harleen,
Yes.
that as I learn more about collaborative practice, I recognize collaborative practice is not limited to family therapy or psychotherapy. There's more in terms of application. So can you say a little bit more about how collaborative practice can be applied to different disciplines or across context or culture?
Okay, sure, I'd be happy to. So I use the assumptions of collaborative practices and the philosophical stance, action guiding sensitivities in all of my professional work, whether, as you said, that's psychotherapy, whether it's learning, teaching, doing research, working in organizations, doing leadership coaching, etc. So maybe I'll start by saying a few things about collaborative learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think in terms of collaborative learning communities, in other words, creating a community in which learners learn with each other as well as the teacher, and the teacher learns with the students. And perhaps I can just read a brief definition of collaborative learning as a starting point. I say that collaborative learning entails creating relationships, context, and processes in which participants can be introduced to a new discourse and negotiate and learn the language of its knowledge community. And in so doing, learners create a new language, a new knowledge for themselves that is meaningful and relevant, and they acquire self-confidence and ease in that language. So in other words, it's helping people feel their way into a new discipline or a new learning area in which they become mutually involved with the other learners, for example, in a classroom, in critically inquiring into the ideas, exploring the language, exploring the vocabulary of the new discourse, the new discipline, exploring meanings and developing their own understandings. And that it's important for the teacher to keep in mind that the learners will never learn it exactly the way that they hope that they will learn it, because that would be totally impossible. So it's a challenge to create a collaborative learning community. And two of the important parts of it that I've talked about earlier do have to do with relationships and conversations, and how you help the learners, the students in a classroom or members of a team, for example, begin to find ways to learn about each other, to know each other, and to be comfortable with each other and beginning to talk. Not comfortable in the sense of being totally at ease, because sometimes people aren't quite comfortable in the beginning of new relationships or a new encounter like learning. But comfortable in the sense of being able to recognize that they have a voice and to express and participate with that voice. And one of the ways that I find that's quite helpful is that, let's say, for example, you have a classroom of 30 people or you have a classroom of 130 people, that you find ways for students in the beginning to interact and talk with each other in what I call smaller conversational circles, where they spend time learning and talking with each other. That gives learners and students who might otherwise be more reserved or less likely to speak up to say something, to participate. And that begins to develop a sense of participating, a sense of belonging to this learning community, this learning endeavor. So I think that's important. And then when people come back to the larger class, say of 130, I don't think it's necessarily important to think that everybody speaks. Everyone doesn't have to speak. But what's most important is that the students are engaged. They're engaged with their own inner conversation about what they're reading, about what they're hearing from the teacher, and about what they're hearing from other students. And it's very important not to forget that we can learn as teachers from our students, and that they can learn from each other. Some of the challenges for a teacher or professor or a team leader, for example, in creating a collaborative learning community is that sometimes we get very passionate about this, and we want to impose it on the learner, and that we have to go along with the learner, walking alongside them. Because, for example, in the United States, most students in classrooms, whether that's in a middle school, a high school, or a university, are used to not having a voice. And they're used to following the teacher's instructions. In other words, the teacher is the expert. And they're used to having to learn something and then say it back, regurgitate it. In other words, rote or memory learning. So it's a shift that for some people has to be a gradual shift. And you have to remember that as a teacher to be able to walk along with your students. That if you want them to learn collaboratively, you have to learn to quote unquote teach collaboratively. And then it's another challenge for teachers is what I think of as granting authority to the student, to the learner. We're used to, as teachers, as being the authority person in the room, and we have to be able to let go of some of that, or to be able to share parts of it, and let the students be able to express and demonstrate their own authority. This is also part of students learning to be leaders, not only in their own learning, but in their classroom, in their communities, and in their future work in the world. Another challenge in collaborative learning is learners granting authority to their peers. In other words, how to create an environment in which some students don't think they're better or smarter than others or have more to contribute, but to be able to respect and value what each member of that learning community has to contribute. And these are just the highlights. I think when we share the resources, we can share some articles on collaborative learning. And that it's also important when you're able to have a classroom or a team where you have more advanced students or more advanced learners, to be able to use those learners as bridges. So you have the teacher, you have the very new learners, and then you have some who may have been studying this for a while. And so they help the new learners with learning about this new discourse, this new discipline, this new vocabulary, and they act as a bridge or a connector between the new learners and the teacher. It's a very, very important role. In the International Certificate Program on Collaborative Dialogic Practices that we mentioned in one of the earlier segments, where we have learning programs around the world, several of the programs have created second and third year programs for their learners. And in each of those, what they find is that the second and third year students are very valuable to incorporate in the beginning learning community. So what it begins to call attention to is the importance of having heterogeneous learning communities rather than just homogeneous learning communities. That the differences, and particularly the differences in experience with the new discipline or the new discourse or the new curriculum content can be a richness for learning. And then another challenge that I'll mention I call maintaining a non-foundational perspective within a foundational system. And what I'm referring to there is that the external context within which we work, within which we teach and create learning communities, have expectations of us as to what we should be teaching and how we should be teaching it, and that there are these certain things that students should learn, and they should learn them this way. So it's the real balance of how to respect those expectations, but can we meet those expectations in a way that's more fitting and coherent with collaborative learning. So I'm going to pause there on collaborative learning. I'm not sure if you want to offer a comment. If so, I invite it, or a question.
I think that collaborative learning is so essential, I think, in collaborative practice. And I think I want to talk a little bit in Chinese to highlight this.
Because this is what you've been doing. You've been creating collaborative learning communities here in China as well as in Taiwan. So please, I think our viewers could really benefit from your experiences with collaborative learning as it relates culturally.
Okay, good. 我在早期的时候，刚开始学这个合作取向，我以为它只是一个咨询的东西，但是随着时间的流动，我发现它浩瀚无涯，它可以运用的方向特别广。那刚刚哈令老师提到，就是合作式的学习啊。然后我自己感觉到，就是比如说在教学里面，怎么样让合作的学习可以让学生更有参与感，然后让学生觉得他们的想法都是重要，而且学生之间不要比较，说谁比较好，谁比较不好，可能每个人都有他的脉络，但是大家都可以好好出现。然后老师虽然有很多东西可以跟学生共同，就是可以分享给学生，但是老师也愿意跟学生学习，所以在合作的思维的学习的环境里面，它总是有很多很多的空间，而且每个人都觉得有参与感。然后我觉得不管是对我的教学，对我做工作坊，对于我做各式各样的东西都有很深的影响啊，所以我觉得特别好。现在在台湾还有在大陆，陆陆续续有很多人开始去接触合作，大家开始思考到说，合作不是只是咨询，合作可以运用的范围特别广。然后老师现在哈令老师现在提到的是先针对合作式的学习，所以他在对教育做反思啊，到底我们原来的教育是怎么走的？然后有没有更多的对话、更多的关系可以在教育的空间里发生？我觉得特别特别难得。我过去没有这样子的理解啊，但是现在越来越理解，所以觉得合作怎么样运用在我们对于教育、对学习都有很多很深刻的帮助。然后我其实也上了很多课啊，在跟大家分享叙事，在我教课里面，其实就有很多合作的思维在里头啊。然后大家如果说喜欢上希娟老师的课啊，在里面觉得可以表达自己，然后学员彼此之间觉得是特别的可以交流，特别的流动。那我要说的是，这样子的教学方式啊，我也受到合作很深的影响啊，所以希望大家就是在学习合作的时候，也来想一想合作的学习到底是怎么回事。这些理论它不能只是理论啊，然后它必须是可以实践的，而且哈令老师他也非常强调，理论一定要实践才是重要的理论。如果理论实践不出来，那就太可惜了啊。那我们如何把理论实践在学习或各式各样的东西？然后另外也去思考，当我们在实践的时候，这背后的理念可能是什么？这样子啊。Okay, so I sort of share with people about how collaborative learning can be so useful in educational system or in learning community, and I was giving some examples of myself and people in Taiwan or in China, encourage people to look at collaborative as something more than just collaborative. I mean, there's multiple areas that people can see, and it's really good. And I also said that if people, because I have done a lot of workshop in China, and I said that if you like my workshop, and then my teaching also has been influenced by collaborative learning, collaborative teaching. So, yeah.
So if a viewer's been in one of your workshops, they've experienced collaborative learning.
Yes, yes.
Okay, or
yes.
being part of a collaborative learning community.
Yes,
okay.
yes,
okay.
yes. Okay.
Okay, so maybe I could say a couple of sentences about research.
Yes, yes. Okay.
I think of research as collaborative inquiry. And most of us have inherited ideas about research that incorporate the notion or concept that there is such a thing as an objective observer who can be neutral, who can look from the outside in and have a better idea as to what is happening, what has been happening, etc., and predict from what they see than the people involved on the inside. In other words, the participants' experiences. And from a postmodern social construction perspective, it's impossible to be objective, it's impossible to be neutral, because as you are looking at your data, as you are interpreting it, analyzing it, you are participating in influencing what it is that you have seen. And if I back up a moment, in research you're always participating in influencing what you're seeing while you're seeing it. So when you're interpreting and analyzing your data, you're doing the same thing. You cannot help but influence your results. It's impossible to not do that. So from a collaborative perspective, I like to think more in terms of what I call insider research, that we are looking at something together, that it's important for me to let the people that I'm going to be using as quote-unquote subjects to know what I'm interested in learning about, why I'm interested in learning about, and also to ask them, as I'm learning about this, I would also be interested in knowing what you might be interested in learning about yourself or your particular work group, whatever the topic or the investigation is, so that we can create something that has usefulness and relevance for them as well as for me.
I think that collaborative research is very different from what we are usually familiar with. So this is something very important for people to be thinking about.
Yeah.
Maybe I talk a little bit in Chinese.
Well, also let me just say that,
okay.
that most of collaborative research would come on the qualitative side of the research spectrum rather than the quantitative side. But my comments about research that I just made are more in general across both of these sides. Yeah,
Okay.
but please, okay.
Okay, good.
So yeah, share
Okay.
some of your thoughts about research
Okay, okay.
in Chinese.
Yes, yes, good. 哈令老师刚刚在跟大家分享合作式的研究啊，然后就像我前头说的，合作它并不是只是咨询啊，因为它是一个哲学观，它是一个态度，所以遇到不同的运用的东西，它都可以再做不同的反思。所以合作式的学习可能跟我们以前熟悉的研究就不太一样，合作式的研究跟我们以前熟悉的研究就不一样了啊。那个研究者跟所谓的这些被研究的人是在一个合作的一个位置里面，而且做研究的人可能会去问这些参与研究的人，他们希望研究的人可以从他们身上学到的是什么，就是不会只是研究者自己唯一去决定说要做怎么样的研究啊，有一种合作的感觉。所以像这样子合作的研究会让 这个参与研究的人会觉得他们不是被研究啊，而是他们也可以有他们的声音，有他们的想法。然后刚刚哈琳老师提到那个insider research 提到说这个就是怎么样子去进入到人们内部他们想要去被理解的东西啊。那过去的也许比较像 outsider research， 就是我们专家我从外面来研究你。但是现在是这些所谓的研究的人会进入到 inside， 进入到人们的生活文化，去看看可以怎么样做研究。那我想说的是，这种研究的视野也是很不一样的，它会让参与研究的人有一种新的体会，而且觉得自己也是可以贡献的，特别特别的难得。那我想说的是在早期我自己不管是在研究所里面做学生，或是我是老师教授在美国的时候，初期大家都比较没有办法做这样子的研究。随着时间的流动，越来越多的人开始去思考到底要做怎么研究，所以世界上有越来越多的人在参与合作式的研究，因为这是一个多元的时代，可能研究也要有所调整，研究也可能要有一些变化，这样子。Okay. So I said that when I was in the States at that time that majority of the research are primarily sort of like what we are familiar with. And it kind of takes time for people to recognize collaborative research, but it's sort of coming along. And I said that for us here, it might take time, but maybe people, if you are doing research, probably we could be thinking about how collaborative research can help us to do research, to reflect upon what kind of research we want to do and how we like to do research. So something kind of be thinking about.
About that.
Yeah, it might take some time, but something to be thinking,
yeah.
Okay.
Also, when I think about research, I think about the idea of the practitioner, the therapist, the counselor, doing research as part of everyday practice. Now, what do I mean by that? That usually research is done after the fact, like at the end of therapy. It's done by an outsider, and you learn something from that research that you want to generalize across other similar kinds of populations or problems, for example. Research is everyday practice, places importance on the therapist always inquiring, always asking for feedback in terms of how the therapy is going. I think you can do that at the end of each session by simply asking, how was this session today? Did we talk about what you wanted to focus on? Were there some things that you had hoped we'd talk about that we didn't talk about? Some things you want to make sure that I remember from today that you want to follow up on next time, so that you have an evaluation with the client and hear their perspective on how the session went and to what degree it's helpful or not. There are some therapists who use brief forms and maybe 4 kind of topics that they and the clients respond to look at their experiences of research. But what you can do is you use what you're learning in the evaluation of the research on a more frequent basis as the therapy goes along. And you can use that to fine-tune and shift the direction of the therapy or counseling if you need to. So you don't get to the end of therapy and decide, was this useful or not?
This is so important. Often people think about research is some researcher is doing, but you are talking about practitioner, how to embrace research as their day-to-day clinical practice, getting feedback. That kind of research is very important and meaningful.
And it connects to an idea that we were talking about in an earlier segment with the reflective practitioner, that as a practitioner you're continually trying to learn from your work and use that learning again to fine-tune or modify or shift the direction of your work or the focus of it as you go along.
Yes, yes, reflective practice, a reflective practitioner. I mean, I think a lot of concepts that you are talking about is really something I think that people can continue thinking about.
And again, we'll provide some references on the resource list if people want to read further in these particular areas.
Yes.
So another area in which I use collaborative practices is coaching.
Yes, yes.
So maybe I'll just say a few words about coaching. That in coaching, I want to value the expertise, the experience, the knowledge that the person I'm working with brings. I want to invite their voice in. I want to show them that I respect what they have to offer. I want them to develop a goal for our work together, and meaning a goal for themselves and their lives. And in our talking about their goal, I want them to be able to further clarify that, to be a little more explicit and sure of what they want to focus on. And as I'm saying that, I'm remembering, because we just did a 2-day workshop on coaching earlier, last week in Beijing. And I did 2 demonstration coaching sessions. And it was very interesting because in both of them, what the person said they wanted as their goal at the beginning of our talk, throughout our talk, it ended up that it shifted 3, or in one case 4 times before they really landed on what was really the relevant goal of what they wanted to focus on. And in both of those, I think what happened is that the person had a goal that was a distant goal, which there's nothing wrong with having a distant goal, but sometimes you have to have smaller goals between now and then as goal points to reach. And that often the strategies that you want to develop are more specific to each sort of goal step toward the end goal. So I think helping a person develop clarity in terms of the goal they want to reach and how they might be able to do that is very important. Also in coaching, accountability is usually quite important. Again, for example, we were talking with a businessman last night, and one of the things that was important for me in terms of concluding our session was who would be his accountability partner? Who would he let know what he was trying to accomplish, and who would he sort of quote unquote report to or have a conversation with about how he accomplished it or how he was not able to accomplish it. I think one of the things that distinguishes coaching from therapy or counseling that's not only particular to collaborative coaching but to any approach to coaching is that it's very future oriented. It's helping people move forward to the futures that they desire, the futures they want to create for themselves. And that usually not a lot of attention is focused on the past. It also focuses usually more on the positive, again helping people to be aware of, to acknowledge, and to build on the strengths and resources, the talents, the gifts, the wisdom that they have, and to be able to use that and develop it in the fullest, rather than focusing on the deficits or the perhaps dysfunctions that they may experience. And that coaching can focus on business, professional, career, job, work issues, or can focus on broader life issues in terms of decisions people are trying to make about the direction of directions for their life, important life decisions.
Yes, that the coaching interview, I think it's like in Taipei for 3 days, and people really like it and thinks that, oh, collaborative practice can be used in coaching. And then many people responded, they find it's very, very helpful. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. That was in Taipei and not in Beijing. We've been doing so many different things. I forget where we did what. So yeah, but right, yeah, that was in Taipei.
Yeah, yeah.